First of all, good evening and good morning, depending on wherever you are. Greetings. I, Purushendra Singh, on behalf of CUTS International, welcome everyone to our second virtual workshop of the series, Defense News Conclave, Stories of U.S. India. This workshop, India-U.S. collaborations in defense industry, technology, innovation, and trade. So before we dive into the informative and fruitful discussion, just setting out some house announcements. Today's session will be 1 hour and 30 minutes long. This panel discussion will be for 1 hour, after which we will have a question and answer session to make the session even more interactive. We encourage the members of the panel to keep their cameras on during the session and also keep your microphones on mute unless you are speaking. 2, this session is being recorded and will be released later on CUTS International YouTube channel. It is encouraged that the audience members post their questions indicating relevant speakers in the chat box to make this session more interactive. With this and further ado, I hand over the reins of the workshop to our moderator, Ms. Sandhya Sharma, Editor, Technology Policy and Foreign Policy, ET Prime, who would introduce our panel and take this workshop forward. Over to you, Sandhya.
Thank you so much, Guru. Really appreciate that. Good morning and good evening to everyone who's present from all across the globe here. Today's workshop, which is the second as what Guru talked about, is talking about India-U.S. collaboration in defense industry, technology, innovation, and trade. We have a fantastic panel today joining us from across the globe. We have Richard M. Rossow, Senior Advisor and Wadhwani Chair in U.S. India Policy Studies, Center for Strategic and International Studies. We've got Colonel K.V. Kuber, Director, Aerospace Defense, working with Ernst & Young. And we've got Subimal Bhattacharjee, Independent Consultant on Defense and Cybersecurity and former country head, General Dynamics. Thank you, gentlemen, for being part of this series, the second, which is the India-U.S. Defense and Technology collaboration. And I would open the floor straight away to all of you to talk about how actually Galwan actually shaped up the Indo-U.S. collaboration. Of course, post-Kargil, India was very much looking inward, but started diversifying post-Kargil war. However, a couple of incidents that have happened, whether it was Galwan or the recent geopolitical tensions around Russia-Ukraine war, how well do you see the general dynamics of the geopolitical landscape with respect to the Indo-U.S. Defense Cooperation? I would open the floor first to Richard and for his initial comments on this and take it forward from there. Thanks.
Well, thanks, Sandhya, and thanks to CUTS for having me on. Great topic and very timely as you see a big summer of critical meetings looking to further U.S.-India security cooperation, both directly between us as well as through the Quad. So there can't be a better time to, I think, have these kind of conversations. I think, it's always important, I think, to start off by talking about some of the challenges that we need to overcome, not to walk blindly into thinking that cooperation is kind of without limits unless we remove some of the underbrush that continues to be sticky. I think we have a still kind of this continued real serious mismatch on expectations for what defense cooperation is going to look like, particularly related to defense trade and defense innovation. I would say from the Indian side, we continue to dance around this issue where India does not simply want a buyer-seller relationship. The Indian government, when they talk to U.S. defense companies and industry, they want access to the root technology that's related to underpinning that. And the idea that India becomes self-sufficient, learns the best from the best, and takes that to another level. But the problem is, here you've got the Indian government presenting this to the U.S. government. The problem is that the U.S. government does not actually control that technology. Most advanced U.S. defense technology is actually held and developed by the U.S. private sector. So you've got the Indian government conveying this to the U.S. government. The U.S. government really does not have a lot of easy and normal ways to begin reaching into the U.S. private sector. Now, sure, I mean, all of it is up for sale. I think at this point, if Indian government or Indian firms wanted to control access to root technology, there probably isn't a whole lot that the United States wouldn't consider selling whole hog. But if we talk about a sale of defense tech and then access to that root tech, it's a little tougher to do that in a government-to-government negotiation. So if the United States is probably not going to meet, at least not easily, India's expectations on sharing the root tech for defense industry, would U.S. firms build locally? And I think that's where a lot of the conversation begins shifting to, especially as you see in the Modi government lifting foreign investment regulations related to defense and talking aspirationally about new projects and programs, incentivizing those companies that build locally, whether it's a foreign company or a domestic company. So you see, I think more recently, a little bit of the shift towards, is there more scope for U.S. companies to begin investing locally and building locally? Well, I would say off the bat, it's harder than it sounds. I keep kind of one foot in both camps of looking, very directly at India's investment environment and what that means, as well as on defense. And I would say, when you think about, okay, India does have one of the largest defense budgets in the world, but a lot of that is dedicated towards personnel. About 60% of India's budget is dedicated for personnel, and that's about twice the size of India's neighbor, China. I do think that a lot more defense equipment from the United States is on the table, things that we'd be willing to part from that even 10, 15 years ago we wouldn't have been. But setting up in India, there's a couple of critical challenges, I think, when you're talking to an American company about that prospect. First, any kind of manufacturing in India still is not terribly easy. Despite multiple years now of this Make in India initiative and trying to offset, not just in defense, of course, but in everything. What's happened on manufacturing in India? Well, actually, manufacturing as a percent of the economy has actually declined, right? It was about 14% when the Modi government took office. It's down to about 13% of GDP now is manufacturing. So, you've seen this drawdown from China, but India has not yet proven to be the next best place. So, when you think about the challenges that manufacturers in IT and textiles and things have, and the reasons they haven't come to India, it's access to reliable access to electricity and water, clean purified water that's critical for so much of manufacturing, high cost of input goods, logistics cost, a lack of smaller suppliers. All that is applicable to the defense industry. It's not like you have a separate electric power grid that feeds directly to defense industry. So a lot of the same challenges that manufacturers and other industries face, you've got that in India. And so, having, I think, a few Indian state governments, because of course, a lot of the issues that preclude wider manufacturing, including defense, are actually issues that state governments hold, not the national government. You got a couple of states right now that I think are pretty aggressive in pursuing defense. But gosh, if you had, 7 or 8 states that were really targeting defense investments rather than just 2 or 3, then I think a certain momentum would begin to build. The second thing is that, the Indian Ministry of Defense is a pretty finicky buyer. And I find that, like, when defense officials talk about U.S. companies come, set up manufacturing, do it now, do it fast, you might be, even when we know that there's a technology set that the Indian government wants for its military, sometimes it's a decade or longer before an actual deal comes to fruition. So how would you possibly put up plant property and equipment and hire employees when it might be 10 years before you actually start making something? So I think, more states doing deeper reforms to make the manufacturing ecosystem better, that will be very attractive to U.S. companies to set up. And then second, in as much as the Ministry of Defense can continue to improve and expedite its acquisition process, that'll give companies a little bit more comfort too, that the deal pipeline, it's not 10 years between deals. Things are going to move a lot faster. I think those things will be at least as attractive as kind of the top level things of, U.S. government talks with India being nice and cordial, that kind of thing. Now, it's not to say that we haven't tried to jumpstart new areas of defense technology cooperation. Most notably, I think through the Defense Technology and Trade Initiative that was created, about a decade ago during the Obama administration. I mean, this was an attempt to jumpstart where they're trying to get U.S. companies to voluntarily offer critical defense technology to the Indian side for potential co-production and co-manufacturing. But here we are, more than a decade later, and we still don't have any viable projects to show for it. But I wouldn't say give up on DTTI. It's aspirational. I think it sets the bar very high. We've not done this with any other country. There's a dedicated team at the Pentagon, the India Rapid Reaction Cell, moving technology approvals in a way that we don't have with other countries. So I wouldn't say give up on it, but you know, we are always kind of hoping that things will move a little bit faster. The last advice I would have for the U.S. side, you know, is always look for ways to improve trust. If we want the United States to be the defense supplier of choice to India, we've got to make sure that when we got these opportunities to dodge these moments of trust where, you know, we fall a little bit short, we've got to take advantage. And one that I think is really hitting us hard right now is the potential application of sanctions on India under the Countering American Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, India buying the Russian S-400 missile system. You know, taking a decision to give a waiver before the invasion of Ukraine would have been a whole lot easier. Not that I think even the top U.S. experts thought the invasion was real until it began. But, you know, those moments, I think, when we can get ahead of the curve and actually show India and repeat, you know, this deepening level of trust that we have, rather than waiting for crises before it gets a lot of attention, I think is going to be super crucial. So, number one, watch for the mismatch of expectations. I don't think our conversations are always as realistic as they should be. I think we try to dodge sometimes this mismatch. We need to take it head on and recognize that there are challenges that we face. Getting U.S. firms to build locally, that's going to be success in a lot of the Make in India campaign programs and expediting defense acquisition. And lastly, you know, is again, always focus on trust. This is, again, one of the things that I think the Indian side has with the United States. We need to overcome it. We need to work very hard to make sure that we constantly are looking for ways to build and prove that trust. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. I think you've put a very pertinent point across on trust, but I would move on to Colonel Kuber to kind of put things in perspective. What really led to this sort of a trust building between US and India at this time? Do you see China as a very critical factor in making sure this relationship sustains?
Hi, thank you, Sandhya. Good evening, good morning, everybody here. So I don't want to begin talking about China. I think I'll put it towards the end because China cannot be a factor in the trust between US and America. And if it were so, then I think the trust will never build up because there cannot be a third party which can influence the trust between two parties. So here we are talking about two great democracies. We are talking about the strategic importance of the relationship between India and US. We are talking about the mutual interests in the commercial, geopolitical, and defense space. So what could be the mutual interests of two great democracies, two biggest democracies of the world? That has to be defined. And that is going to be the basis of trust. And no third country, to my mind, can become, even if it's a rogue country, can become a basis of building trust between. No, then your enemy's enemy being a friend is not a very great idea. So I think one of the greatest things that we have is the 2+2, which is bringing together these two countries on various policy issues. And in the prevailing geopolitical backdrop, of course, the cornerstone is, like Rick was mentioning, we talked about the DTTI, and I'm going to talk about it a little later. But then when you started, Sandhya, you talked about, Kargil and how that has shaped up everything. So I was part of the committee, which was, which actually went from India as part of the Jaswant Singh-led committee on the, the Jaswant Singh Stroke Talbot talks for prevention, for prevention of Kargil type of situation. And we were in Albuquerque for a few days, and then we were with the State Department for a few days, and we discussed a host of issues. And time and again, one of the issues that always kept coming up was this trust that was mentioned by Rick. And there I would like to talk about the sanctions that were placed, after our nuclear explosion. Do you know that our scientists who were working in the US at that time, our people working on various projects were ill-treated. Their belongings were kept back. They were just sent to the airport with whatever they were wearing at that point in time. Even a pen and paper from them was removed, and all their belongings were shipped or not shipped later. I'm not sure, but that's what happened on sanctions with the US. if that had not happened, we would have had an aircraft better than the F-35 between India and US long ago. The second thing that happened was all these countries which are the allies of Uncle Sam, all our equipment that went there for repairs, for example, UK, for example, somebody else, they all held back that equipment and didn't even give us back our equipment, which we purchased from our money. So that was one particular episode which hangs on as a backdrop sometimes. Well, I think that is past. We want to leave it behind and go forward. Here is what it is. When we have to go forward, when you say we want to match our expectations, and we have to match on how we are going to do things in India. So I think we started with this entire new framework of the defense relations in 2005. Then we went on to the civil nuclear agreement of 123. Then we launched the new economical and financial partnership for deeper economic relations in 2010. We signed the memorandum for greater cybersecurity cooperation in 2011. 2012, the DTTI was established. And here I want to talk about DTTI a little bit. From the US side, it was led by the Undersecretary of the Defense of Acquisition and Sustainment. From the Indian side, it was Secretary of Defense Production. The idea was to speed up the defense technology cooperation between India and US, and a standard operating procedure to harmonize the process was ratified in 2019. Believe me, after 7 years, two great democracies. And buy-sell relationship to transform and transmigrate into a co-development, co-production type of relationship. And towards this end, India went on to even amend our procedures and policies. The DPP, which is the DAP 2020, has introduced a chapter on co-development and co-production and intergovernment agreements. And of course, there are 4 working groups here, which are the land systems, the naval systems, air systems, and aircraft carrier technology cooperation. To say that nothing has happened may not be a very great statement, because some things have happened. So, and one of the things, if I talk about the DTI projects itself, the air-launched small unmanned systems, which was a small company from Bangalore, NSRL, was working with the Air Force Research Labs on this particular project. And I presume there is some progress that's going on over there. And there were other projects like lightweight small arms technology and intelligence servicing, ISR, intelligence surveillance targeting and reconnaissance, ISTAR projects. Then in the medium term, we had the marine domain awareness. In the long term, we had the terrain shaping obstacle and counter UAS and rocket and artillery motors. So all these are there. What is happening with the DTTI? Both the countries are missing out a teeth. So India thinks it is a defense technology initiative. US thinks it's a defense trade initiative. So either side, I would say it's not a one-side problem. It's a two-side problem. So if we understand that it cannot be only trade and it cannot be only technology, then I think we'll come together in a very, very big way. And I've been reading some articles from Captain Vikram Mahajan, some time ago, one of the thinkers on the subject, and he's laid out a few of these projects that have been discussed and happening as part of this whole initiative. We have been recognized as a major defense partner in 2006, but nothing has been laid down as to what privileges one would have. And of course, I believe this has been subsequently codified in the law, and the designation itself, which is unique to India, all that jazz is good. Unique to India, it facilitates trade, but what has happened? Where does the technology come? Other than India buying Chinooks, buying Apaches, buying C-130s, buying. So we've been buying. We have shown a hand. And it's now time for US to step back on the ITAR and, talk of India as the major defense partner, talk of India in terms of co-development and co-production. A lot is happening from the company side. Companies like Boeing, Lockheed are doing an excellent job. If you see the Tata Lockheed JV out there, and if you see these, so they are very good companies, very good examples. And but what is happening on the government side, I don't know, because there could be a disconnect between the US government and the US companies, and therefore technology denial is something that's happening, I think, in a very subtle manner, and that is something we need to talk about. We have the LIMOA in place, the Logistics Exchange Memorandum. I know the US designated the Indo-Pacific Command in 2018, STA Status 1 and in August 18, and then we had the COMCASA in September. Then the Senate cleared the proposal to bring India at par with the NATO allies. We had the ISA in 2019. We had the BICA. We had the Quad. So I think, and I think, between the militaries, India is doing a lot more exercises with the US military. Indian military and US military are collaborating in a much more grandeur manner than with any other country. Firstly, from India's point of view, and secondly, that this relationship has been enhanced multifold, not once, not twice. So there have been these 2+2 dialogues, and then India has also joined the multilateral combined maritime force in Bahrain as an associate partner. So I think a lot is happening over there. So coming back to this China angle that you threw up, Sandhya, you see, yes, there is a problem with China, but again, India and China go way back, and I think we are tackling it in a very subtle manner. Although I won't say it is the best of tackling that's happening, but yes, a lot of initiative, a lot of working, a lot of talking is going on in spite of all the problems that we have had. But one thing that has brought US and India closer is when we started leasing the Predators, the MQ-9B, the B, and then that was being used, and with the COMCASA, with the type of communication arrangement that we have with the US, which is a secure military communication, I think that's working very well. I want to address one or two more issues before I close down for this particular time, and I'll come back again with other issues. Rick mentioned that manufacturing is not easy in India. So Rick, I think I need to put that in right perspective. Manufacturing is not easy in any part of the world. Manufacturing, I think we have to talk about manufacturing in its holistic manufacturing. And today, if you talk of AI, artificial intelligence, India produces the largest workforce in artificial intelligence anywhere in the world. India is integrating AI, ML into the manufacturing processes. Today, we have some of the state-of-art manufacturing centers in India. We are talking about more than 1 lakh crores. I mean, about $12 billion in defense production alone. Forget about the other sectors. We are talking about 1,75,000 crores in terms of defense production that we want to achieve. We are doing some excellent exports. Today, our LCA is on the light combat aircraft Tejas is on the radar for countries to just pick up. We are competing with the likes of the F-16 and others, and I think we are somewhere coming forward. So to say that it's not easy to manufacture in India, I think we need to revisit that. And to say that only a couple of states are showing interest, again, I want to put that in the right perspective. While we have the identified 2 corridors of the in the north and the south, the Uttar Pradesh and Tamil Nadu, but then there are states like Karnataka, Telangana, Madhya Pradesh, West Bengal, Uttarakhand, Uttaranchal. Today, if you see, there are about 11 states which have got an aerospace and defense policy in India, which is great. And states are putting their step forward, and I think that is very, very great. And I think in terms of US firms, there's a lot of trust. They're doing a lot of work in India. There is a lot of offset discharge that is taking place. We are looking forward to the NASAMS. We are looking forward to the so many of these state of art. We are looking forward to the additional Apaches or P8Is, and we are looking forward a lot of work from the US. But yes, I want to reiterate that we should not miss a T on either sides. And when I come in the second session, I'll talk to you about some of the recent developments and highlights in the 2+2 and how the growth and relationship is actually taking the trajectory forward. Sandhya, back to you.
Thank you, Colonel. Really appreciate that statement. At the same time, I would move on to my next panelist, Mr. Bhattacharjee, where everyone, the two panelists has talked about the defense technology transfers. Do you think technology transfer is an issue between India and US? And do you think that sort of a technology transfer would lead to the next level of cooperation between the two countries?
Thank you, Sandhya. I think two of my distinguished panelists have laid out the ground very well about where everything stands. And that's where also the answer to the question that you have put me also lies. Where is the technology cooperation? How much we have achieved? Are we moving positively into the future, or somewhere a certain kind of a stagnation has happened? So if you take from the 2005 time period, particularly with the next step in strategic partnership till date, where we have done more than $20 billion worth of defense trade, maybe it could be more of a buyer-seller kind of an approach. But there is a lot of technology that has also come into this country. There is a lot of technology that is also being harnessed within the country. A lot of knowledge and understanding is happening in this country. And most important, what it is to realize is that this relationship, the defense relationship, the defense partnership between India and the US is a dynamically evolving one. It has gone through a lot of trials and tribulations, I could say. The point from where we started, where there was a point of mistrust, today to a point of trust to look into the future and newer areas. I think we have covered a lot of ground. Both my panelists covered DTTI very extensively. I also have my frustration around the DTTI and how in 10 years, it couldn't come to an expectation that most of us would have expected, or at least in textbook and paperwork, it looks good. The 9 projects identified somewhere couldn't culminate towards a point where naturally from R&D cooperation to manufacturing that could have happened. And there is no point, as Colonel Kuber has mentioned, to give up. There are a lot of opportunities. There are a lot of programs, and particularly when today we are looking at technology to harness a lot of the defense equipments and the defense ecosystem participation. I think DTTI offers the best possible opportunity. A relook at DTTI could set the ball rolling again to find measurably and practically possible projects to be undertaken and then taken to its logical conclusion. That's where both the sides need to work. Per se, as others have also mentioned, that the foundational agreements that we have signed, the foundational agreement, the signature of all those 4 foundational agreements, they themselves went through a process. They themselves went through an evolutionary process, I could say, within the government system, within the government industry conversations. A lot of points that came up in actually accepting a policy of accepting those US foundational legislations, and hence later working and with cooperation from the US side to be able to sort of, delve them into an India-specific agreement. I think that has been a very good exercise because it carried the services, it carries the defense bureaucracy, it carried the industry along. Now, if we have signed all these 4 and we are at a point of time where we are beyond a naturally trusted position. I think we have been named a major defense partner way back in 2016. And in 2020, during Trump's visit, as we have said, that this is a comprehensive global strategic partnership. So technology is something that we should really look at if we can fit into the TTTI cauldron and try and get around certain projects that we need as well as the Americans need. As Colonel Kuber mentioned, the number of talent available in the country for artificial intelligence is huge. In fact, both India and the US in 2021 last year have signed an agreement around artificial intelligence cooperation. And there is some level of cooperation happening, albeit lesser on the defense and the cyber front. I think that's something that we can bolster. That's something that we have to really look towards a straitjacket approach and see which are the projects that we directly do. That way, the whole effort around Quad, where we are looking at the critical and emerging technologies, and within Quad, the effort that we are giving to a STEM, to a cybersecurity, towards looking at 5G, towards looking at building common standards for operating. I think that is where we could really give a very good example about how Quad partnership can take in these particular areas. So personally, I feel that at this point of time, the leaders are invested from both the nations. Both the President of the US and the Indian Prime Minister think it very, very clear, along with the bureaucracy with them, that there have to be areas we have to look at, and technology offers a great opportunity. So I think, as I've said earlier, we have to specify programs and get it into the DTTI system and see and monitor that it progresses to a point where we can make this successful. Because beyond DTTI, I think DTTI is quite comprehensive, to factor in a lot of things, where even the technology transfer regime could become far much easier, far much more accommodating. Today, a lot has changed. Initially, when you would have even applied for a DSP-5 license, it would have taken more than a month. Today, you get even in 3-4 days' time. So the American bureaucracy, the Pentagon bureaucracy, the State Department bureaucracy, they are favorably inclined towards India. They see that Indians and the programs that are in India, they need that special support that comes with, all the comprehensive strategic partnership, or when you call your India a major defense partner. So I think that happens from that side. I think our bureaucracy understands that America is the best bet, in this point of time, when we have a world which is still very, very going towards a kind of an unstable scenario. So I think we have to look at all of those kind of things. It covers not only our aspirational desires to get into the defense manufacturing and defense ecosystem leadership, and hence become also a net exporter of defense product rather than being one of the largest importers, but also at the same time give the right message of capability to our neighbors, particularly two neighbors who try to regularly rake up tensions in the region. So if we are today looking at Quad, which is looking at the Indo-Pacific, where the other three countries, very mature democracies, understand the security threat in the region and collaborate with us, I think this is clearly a point of time where we need to be taking advantage of that and moving forward. So what are the pitfalls? The pitfalls are that we understand that there is an opportunity, but possibly we are not taking 2 steps forward that we need to take. A certain level of buy and sell trades have happened. A certain level of, you can say, hybrid trade has also happened. The Tata Lockheed Martin or the Tata Boeing facility set up in Hyderabad are great examples where actually both American technology is coming in, as well as products out of India are also going to different countries. The second thing is that we need to look at now that how do we make the Americans even more, the US companies to be far much more adaptive to what we are also trying to do in building up our own capabilities. Atmanirbharta doesn't mean eliminating everyone out. There are still gaps in which we would need American technologies. There are avenues where we see that even if an FMS comes tomorrow, a hybrid FMS where the first 5 vehicles gets from that country, but the rest 95 are manufactured here. And in that 95, not only we are taking, one big system integrator in the country, but also the huge pool of, medium and small enterprises who are also being bolstered up and motivated and supported by the government to come into niche areas of defense manufacturing. So I think we have to again, relook at where we stand after, all these 15 years of gradual increasing sales, gradually increasing military exercises, more engagements, all of that, and see how we recalibrate it towards the next 15 years, next 20 years into a far much more closer cooperation. I would end here at this stage.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bhattacharjee. Really appreciate this opening statement around how we are looking at technology, not just the equipment transfer, but also technology transfer. I would move on to Richard on how do you see this whole gamut of things that are playing around Russia and Ukraine war actually leading or maybe pushing India to hard press this diversification button? Do you see this is going to help India move from its non-aligned policy? Do you also see this is going to be a win-win for both India and US in the days to come?
It's hard to say a win-win. I would say, overall, I think a lot of folks in the DC policy environment are you hear a lot of voices of disappointment about India not taking a stiffer position on Russia vis-a-vis the invasion of Ukraine, wanting to see something stronger, the UN votes, things like that. I wouldn't put myself in that camp, but I'd say by and large, there's a lot of very loud voices that are kind of positioning that way. And you even heard senior officials from the Biden administration. I think that we're echoing, similar sentiments in the days leading up to the recent 2+2. And in fact, I think the water had gotten so choppy in how DC was communicating on India's position on Russia that the president himself had to initiate a conversation directly with Prime Minister Modi just ahead of the 2+2, to say, yes, we'd like to see India gravitating further away, but we weren't going to sever the relationship based on this one issue. It still is a hot debate in this town. And I think, your foreign minister's initial comments about India's new oil buys and that kind of stuff, far less than what Europe was doing at the time, were true. But by the end of this year, that's not going to be true. India will be one of the largest oil importers. You see new deals on fertilizers and things like that. So I think I think some of these frictions, I think we're in a pretty good place right now. But as the year goes on and Europe continues to draw away from Russia as a supplier of energy and other things, India's new relationships and deepening in other areas are going to stick out a little bit more. So I don't think we're quite through the chop on this yet. But so far, the administration has chosen to plunge in deeper directly with India and specifically through the Quad. I do think, for India, it's going to cause an acceleration of a transition away from Russia. I don't know that it's necessarily because of the ideology issue of the invasion and that kind of stuff. India, much like the United States, are more than happy working with countries that others may not like when it suits us. That's not so very different. I think that the reason that you may see an acceleration is because, when you start looking at some of the details on what goes into Russian equipment, the inability for Russia to keep its own supply chains moving to produce the kinds of equipment that India might want to buy. Buying a lot of the critical parts, motors and gears and stuff from European suppliers. Some of the supply chains run through Ukraine, so you can bet Ukraine's not going to have a lot of defense exports to Russia for military equipment anymore. So, indirectly, I think programs that India was looking to buy from Russia may be just simply a lot harder, for Russia to be able to produce at the level they were doing before. So I think, we're in a pretty good place. I think both countries realize China continues to be the one strategic threat that pulls us together. It's big enough, it's growing, it's only going to get bigger in the future. And that keeps the momentum alive, even when we got a little bit of, choppiness in the water that we do right now. But I don't think we can yet say that we sort of write off, Russia as one of those issues that's causing this divide. Because, again, India expanding its relationship with Russia in the middle of this war, it gets kind of buried because it still is relatively small compared to Russia, compared to the rest of Europe. But that's going to change over the course of the year. So I would just say we got to kind of put a pin in that and see where things light out, later in this year as things begin to evolve, Sandhya.
But do you see S-400 could be an issue between the two countries? Because US is pumping pressure on Russia from financial to now even the defense pressure. Do you see S-400 is something where things could get choppy between India and US?
I would say probably 4 or 5 months ago, if you asked me the question on the heels of the invasion, and even the months before the invasion, there was a sense in DC that, well, we could make these sanctions because the way the program works, there's a list of 12 sanctions. If we apply sanctions, you got to choose 5. And if you look at the sanctions, you can make it pinpricks. But still, when you put the word sanction on India, you can't walk that back, even if the actual impact of the sanctions is relatively modest. So I was a little worried that, even before the invasion, having sanctioned a NATO ally in Turkey because of buying the same system, albeit Turkey's moving in a different direction, but our military cooperation in a lot of ways with Turkey is still at a different level, a much deeper level than it is with India, actual operational joint operations and things like that. So you can't offset just because, we may not be favorable to Erdogan, that, sanctioning Turkey is no applicable to India. There's a lot of folks in the United States still say, Turkey's an ally. If we sanction them, how can we not sanction a country like India that's not an ally and doesn't contribute to the big fights the United States has been involved in recent years? But after the invasion, I was even more concerned about the application of sanctions. But right now, I think I'm less concerned only because, even though you haven't seen a formal determination by the United States, the fact that you're having these leader-level summits, minister-level summits so regularly, putting new ideas and new things on the ground, deepening cooperation, there's clear intent. Both sides recognize sanctions, even if the actual sanctions were pinpricks, putting the word sanction on the relationship would be devastating, for some period of time. So the fact that I think that both sides are coming to the table, even post-invasion, and engaging at the leader level, shows intent that we're not going to let cats of sanctions get in the way. So I think, because, as you rightly point out, Sandhya, the impetus in Washington is behind deepening pressure on Russia. They're kind of kicking the can down the road, not choosing to make a determination publicly on sanctions. But you see in practice, it looks like the administration, at least at this point, has the intent to try to move around this and not use this as kind of a severance, at least for a period in security relations. So I'm not as worried right now about cats of sanctions being, the separator between the countries.
Right. Thank you so much, Richard. There, Atmanirbhar. I think that's the pitch. That's a slogan that the Indian government is talking about, and India, or even the collaboration with any other country, India is very pertinent about Make in India. So I would like the comments of Richard again, on starting with Richard, to get a sense, is Make in India something that US is a bit worried about? Russia actually makes a lot of equipment here in India. Is it something that US is looking forward to as well, or is there some sort of a dichotomy there? And I'll move on to other panelists from there. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, I would say announcing all these programs that India plans to indigenize, you've got kind of two perceptions on it. One, US companies that fear about losing business because of that, yeah, they're going to be disappointed. Look, they're companies at the end of the day. They want sales. It is not the driver and the reason for US security cooperation with India. That sometimes gets simplified to say, the only reason we're doing this is because we want to get sales. It's not. China stands at the precipice of eroding all of our freedoms in the region. Freedom of commerce, people's ability to vote the way they want to, and things like that. So it is not about equipment, which sometimes I think it boils down to. But these are companies, and they want to make sales. So that is a voice, I think, in U.S. diplomacy. They're here in Washington. They have an influence on foreign policy. They don't drive it, but they have an influence. So that group, if they feel that they're going to lose some deals, because of indigenization drive, is one thing. The thing that I'm a little more worried about, you talk about the defense programs India has tried to create indigenously over time, fighter jets, things like that. They fall behind every day. So when you think about the threats that are running at India at full speed right now, your border threat, your maritime threat, losing, potentially air dominance around the region. When you think about these threats, is India's indigenization program going to create programs faster than what China is doing right now? Faster than Russia can sell to China? Because of course, your friend in Russia is also selling the same stuff or better stuff to China. So can you build fast enough where your technology will keep up of your neighbors as the threats begin to, really kind of impact you? Because I guarantee China is not waiting to see whether or not the digitization program works or not. And in fact, if they fear that it's catching success, they may be interested in pushing the envelope. So my own thinking is, indigenization makes a lot of sense in those areas where India is closer to the frontier, areas where India has a strategic threat. That means you've got to put all your money on certain threats that you're going to face that, the Lockheeds and the Boeings probably aren't focused on as much. Go to the areas where you're most likely to achieve dominance. In fact, there's kind of three loops, I guess, if I was thinking about this as a planner for indigenization. Areas where you're closer to the frontier on the high end, areas where you've got specific threats where you need to double down your resources, and areas that have a big global market. If you were to pick technology areas for defense production that pass those three, then I think India has a great chance in winning and being a global success. If you're trying to compete with the F-35 and build your own fighters and that kind of stuff, it's a lot harder. And I don't think the threats are going to wait for that. But there's a huge market for a lot of the product areas where India, is, I think, a little bit closer to the threshold for. So I'm excited to see what happens for it. So we'll see, Sandhya.
Great, brilliant perspective on that. I would like to move on to Kuber on if he really agrees with what Richard said, and does he think that there is still a dichotomy between India and U.S. on the whole Atmanirbhar campaign that the Modi government has run?
Okay, so it is Richard versus Kuber. Okay, fine. So Rick, good. I mean, I totally agree with whatever he says. There's nothing to disagree. The question is, when you talk of Atmanirbharta, we are not against anybody else. See, you compare the policy of Atmanirbharta with Katsa. Katsa is what? Whom I don't like, you will not go and buy. Is that a good policy? I mean, if you don't like, you deal with it. How are you forcing somebody else? I mean, we are not going and forcing ourselves on somebody else. We are only saying we want to be self-reliant. We want to be self-sufficient. We have been a country that was dominating the world about 400 years ago, either in terms of trade or in terms of technology or in terms of anything that you want to take. The largest ship ever made was not known to mankind when India made it. So we were at the pinnacle of technology and innovation and manufacturing at a point in time. Well, there has been a history, and we are again where we are. So just because America does not want to transfer a particular technology, we can't keep buying. We look for alternatives. So my question here is CAATSA a good policy? Are we talking about, if I don't like somebody, you will not go and speak to him? Are we talking about this in a global world where we are supposed to live in harmony? Because India believes in Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. We believe the whole world is a peaceful place. And when two great democracies are, you can't compare Turkey and India. When you talk of sanctions, you cannot compare somebody else and India. India is a great democracy, a stable democracy, an example for the world, a rich civilization, everything else. So now, the question is CAATSA a geopolitical effect or is a political tool? Or it's got nothing to do with either industry or technology? Because we are today talking about Indo-U.S. collaboration. Here we are talking about what two great democracies can do together. How we can make the world a better place to live in. Are we talking about how we both together will produce something and destroy everybody else? No, we are not talking about that. India is a country which is guarding its own frontiers. We don't go and fight wars in other territories. We are here just to guard ourselves and be where we are. And in this, are we talking about, see, if I can say that CAATSA has failed, will I be wrong? I mean, I don't know. It's got no effect on China. U.S. refused F-35 to Turkey. And today, Turkey is arm twisting the U.S. to sell its F-16s. Because outside of the U.S., the largest F-16 assembly is in Turkey. And they've got the assembly line. It's got a proven platform. They can upgrade it. They can do everything. And U.S. is, yes, they are agreeing to it because Today, Turkey has turned around and allowed Sweden and Poland to come into the NATO. I mean, Turkey decides and US follows. I mean, I don't know what's happening there. I mean, I leave it there because we are talking about Indo-US relationship. So buying a fighter jet, for example, is not an L1 game. It's not a game of it's not a game of the lowest price. It's a game of trust. It's a game of technology. It's a game of a strategic platform coming in. So we are talking about how technologies are getting transferred. So for example, when the foreign minister of France comes into India, he specifically made a statement. Technology share will take place when we are willing to transfer the complete technology for fighters, for tanks, for engines, and he made specific offers. When the UK Minister of Defense Procurement came, he made a very specific offer. He said, I will share electrical propulsion with India. But when the biggest democracy, the oldest democracy, the greatest democracy, they come, we talk of everything else except specifics. Now let's talk about GE. When we had an advanced, when we are having an advanced discussion on one side with Rolls-Royce, other side with Safran, GE has thrown the hat in the ring. They said, even we want to come and do your engines for AMCA. So the question is, even if they want to do it, I think GE cannot do it unless they work with the Hill, unless they work with the Congress, unless they work with the White House. They have to get the clearances internal before they make the statement. Because tomorrow, when we start talking about the 414 engine with 116 kilonewton thrust, then, you know, we are talking today, Safran is talking to us with 120 kilonewton thrust. I mean, it's very clear. Here, things are not yet clear. So what is the ask? The ask is that we need to share technology. Every company has got its own restrictions. And then there is a government restriction, which is the ITAR. So in case the US wants to take this relationship, I think we have to talk in terms of how we share. There is no fear. You don't lose business anywhere, because sooner or later, we are going to be the game. It's only a question of time. Today, if Philippines wants to buy the BrahMos, well, that's an example. Russia came, we had this collaboration, we had the BrahMos, one of the best weapon systems in the world. You talked about the S-400 and we are asking US whether we should buy S-400. But if we want an air defense system, we've been asking for it for last 20 years. US made no offer. We go and buy from Russia and US says you can't buy. I mean, does it happen like this? So, you know, we talked about the Javelin. We talked about, you know, was the Javelin ever offered earlier with technology? Today we have our own ATGM. We have developed our own man-portable ATGM today. So let us say again, DTTI is a beautiful platform. It can decide projects that we can work together. The Indian procedures have been modified to suit the DTTI, and are we willing to take it forward is the question. So Indonesia, let's say what happened and why it happened in Indonesia. Typical inventory of Russian fighters. There was a threat of Katsa. What does the US say? You don't buy from Russia. We will approve sale for you. We will do a pre-approval sale of F-15 to you. Is it good enough? What did France do? They undercut the F-15 and sold the Rafales. But what did the US do? US said, very good. As far as we are concerned, we have weaned off Russia. So Boeing may be unhappy, but the US government is happy. Is that okay? Is it about anti-Russia? Is it about pro-industry? Is it about anti-somebody else, or is it about two countries, two great democracies working together? I think we need to get our focus over there. And I think the decisions we have been telling, you know, we've been telling the world today. I mean, you talked about Ukraine war and whether somebody else is happy with us or not. Sooner or later, Sandhya, they will have to be happy. India follows its own position. Sweden has moved away from an independent position and they are wanting to ally with the NATO. I think India is still holding ground on an independent foreign policy, and it has earned a great amount of respect in the world today. The way we have orchestrated the foreign policy along with military diplomacy, port calls, and you know, US has announced the I2U2. What, as late as 15 June, we are talking about I2U2. India, Israel, US and UAE. US defense officials come, they visit the Tata Lockheed Martin facility in India. Lindsay Ford, the Deputy Assistant Secretary. General Atomics is looking at aligning with India for the MQ-9s. U.S. has announced a $500 billion aid through one of their defense finance companies to make those investments in India, maybe in the corridors, maybe with some Indian companies. Boeing is pitching for Apaches. We have signed incentive agreements to boost U.S. investment in key sectors. The Quad has opened up. We are talking about $50 billion. The Indo-U.S. ties in cyberspace domains, that's where contemporary technologies, India is in the lead. U.S. has got the technology, but it's a combination of hardware, software, brainware, and we dominate on two fronts over there on the software and the brainware. U.S. has got the hardware. I think we need to get this together. IIT Madras has teamed up with GE. Boeing is F-18 Super Hornet begins test on the Indian aircraft carrier. They've done it. It's done very well. The Indian defense minister has urged the U.S. companies when he goes there. The prime minister has urged the U.S. companies. He talks to the top CEOs of U.S. He goes there. He talks. He spends time, invests with them, and reaches out to them. We have amended our policies. So I think I think a lot of water's flown, and I think we can do much better. And Atmanirbharta is a great policy. Yes, with not in isolation, but as Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Yes, Sandhya, back to you.
Thank you. You've raised very pertinent questions, but I'll move on now to Mr. Bhattacharjee to put a point across on what does U.S. needs to do more to woo India towards itself. We obviously discussed on technology, trust, some of these issues that we have chatted about, but where do you see U.S. needs to do more, and do you think there's also a room for improvement for India to move a step ahead to collaborate with U.S. on defense?
Surely, I think it's a very nice question. Definitely, the U.S. needs to do its homework as India needs to do. And from the U.S. point, they have to appreciate the fact that India needs technology. India needs technology in many areas in defense. And the more bureaucratic pressures come in delaying them or trying to hide them away, it's not going to take this relationship forward. There is an opportunity for the U.S. to grab. They have to come with it. And at the same time, on the Indian side, the appreciation must also be there that if technology is coming or being provided, it comes at a cost. A lot of years of R&D has gone. I think a lot we have to learn in this country also on the R&D culture. All these years, we have been absolutely stick-beat by DRDO. Now the government has opened up the R&D fund also for the private sector, and whatever meager amount the private sector in this country had put and built up their own R&D, I think it has been optimal. But what remains to be seen is that we also have to appreciate, and we have to find a common ground. The governments, the bureaucracies have to find a common ground. The companies want, there is no denial of the fact that the American defense corporations want their footing in India. They have their spread all across the services. So if any product that goes to all these services has a requirement here, the necessity, this size of the military, the requirement, the dangers, the situation in which India operates and all, I think it's an opportunity for the US corporation. So that whole ecosystem from the American side, it has to work. And here it has to be appreciated and a common ground has to be found out. I think some examples have been set. The joint ventures that have set up, they are now manufacturing, they are showing that this is possible. So why not only remain to the big guys, come also to the small niche companies, the MSMEs also, to be able to find their own space. And that's where we can move forward. The Americans also, besides understanding India's requirement for technology, also have to understand about how our democracy also works here, in terms of decision making and everything. Yes, in many cases, many programs get delayed. They are announced, they go through the motions, get cancelled, come again. Then these frustrations are up here. But what also remains is that there is a very clear, well laid out process in which an acquisition happens here. So they have to bid their time, they have to understand that and appreciate their local partners about how they weighed them through that process. From the Indian side, the respect for what the Americans also see through in their, the bureaucratic structure they have, the processes that they have. It's a very well laid out process, and we have appreciated it and we have followed it, when we signed the foundational agreements. But there remains the opportunity to find specific programs. I still feel, to the point of repetition, that DTTI offers a great scope. We identify, 5-6 good programs and particularly work on them and make it possible. And that's where we also play our bureaucracy and see, that they don't become bottlenecks and they remain facilitators. There is no reason that we need to be, going around the world if we are able to get this technology. Much has happened, much can happen, and that is where it has to be appreciated from both the sides. And as someone, as you are also someone who advocates technology, understands the advantage of technology, so do I. And I can say here that I think today, when through Quad we are looking at the critical and emerging technologies, I think this is something that we both, the bilateral relationship should show this forward. For example, when we are talking about the principles of technology, design, development, and use, I think this is an area that we can really work. We worked a lot on 5G. I think that was a great area. But at the same time, on 5G, even within our country, we did some great job that the indigenous developed technology is something that the Americans can tomorrow take and push it in their country or many other geographies. Similarly, the dialogues on critical technology supply chain, that's very, very important. We both realize the criticality of that. We know that, that there are rogue countries that look to put in bugs and all kinds of, backdoor traps. And that's where a commonly evolved supply chain monitoring mechanism, I think, is very, very important. That's where, again, we can work on. So, you can go on. Technology today offers these two countries a great scope to be shaping together. We have the best of the resources. Americans have already worked on the processes and all. So if we both match them together and work around a DTTI approach, I think we can achieve much more than possibly we are seeing right now.
Right. Thank you so much, Mr. Bhattacharjee, for this comment. And I would like to also kind of touch upon you've talked about 5G and India's standards as well. Do you see that 5G is also going to be one of the critical technologies where India and US would collaborate in the future? Of course, India has banned a range of Chinese apps. At the same time, India is looking at ensuring that 5G also is a trusted source network. So do you see that narrative which is going on in the Quad? All the Quad members are talking about it as part of a secure network. Do you see that is going to be the hallmark of the two countries' participation? Anyone can also talk, and I would also like Mr. Bhattacharjee to comment on that.
Okay, I'll go first and then I leave it to the other two distinguished panelists. See, I think this is something that we are talking with the Americans right from the beginning. The messages that they send through their actions around Hawaii and others, and the discussions that we have been having with them, and the offer also from the American side, their 5G technology. I think that was an indication where we started much, much early. Now that we are at the rollout phase in various stages, either in US or even here, and particularly when we are developing the standards, when we are aligning them to a common position, particularly around Quad, when we are talking about it, I think we have a chance to be able to even lead Quad in this aspect. I think our joint understanding around standards, our joint understanding around the critical supply chains, our joint understanding around the monitoring of equipments and the ecosystem. This is something that the other two Quad members can take, and overall Quad as such could have its own trust or trusted system networks or a mechanism to be able to trust each other. That's something that we can lead. And I think there are conversations already happening in this direction.
I can weigh in briefly, Sandhya. Kind of echoing what Subimal brought up. I do like the fact that so far, the Quad is focused on areas where, China is really attempting to weaponize the control on global trade flows. So 5G, that was the pointy end of the spear. That was the first where I think, the United States and India and others really kind of began to agree. And Japan's really kind of pushing this other idea of submarine cables as well. China moving into submarine cables and potentially be able to control cross-border data flows by actually holding the infrastructure. But if you look at the Quad work streams, there's other areas which I think have a lot of application to the conversation we've having so far. You look at rare earths, where China, sources 60% and refines about 90% of rare earths, which are critical for the magnets and other items that go into high-end defense equipment. Other critical minerals, pharmaceutical ingredients, even data flows, things like that. These are areas where if we erode China's ability to weaponize global flows of these critical things, I'm not worried about soap and shampoo and stuff like that. But if we're focused on the areas where there's a strategic overlay, and I think also, and this kind of leans in as well, finally cooperating better on combined infrastructure programs. Because when we talk about China's attempt to dominate the Indian Ocean and dominate India's neighborhood, today, right now, the primary thrust is the attempt to control strategic infrastructure throughout the region. And if the other countries can band together and provide, alternatives to countries that are looking, sometimes you can't. These countries would not put money towards a port in Gwadar, Pakistan. I've seen the numbers, the commercial relevance for that isn't great. So some of the strategic infrastructure projects too, they're not commercially viable. No amount of money or good sense is going to be able to dissuade, the country from accepting that kind of money. But I do 5G is kind of the point into the spear, but there's a lot of other great areas we're working on. And some of that have direct overlay with, I think, security cooperation too. So I'm excited to see these work streams as they evolve.
Thanks, Richard. Appreciate that.
Yeah, so,
I have the liberty.
I think just taking on this particular aspect of Quad and 5G and all that. So I think what Subimal brings out is a very valid point, that we are in the phase of rollout today. And what is important is 5G is one portion of the whole thing. And when we talk about information sharing, and if I were to look at the world in future as a world which is going to be dominated by information, only on information, perception management and things like that. And I think we are going to talk about intercommunicability in a very big way. And the 50 billion commitment that's been made on infrastructure development in the Indo-Pacific is going to be a guiding factor to see as to where all we're going to put that money down. And there have been the common statement of principles on critical technology areas. So I think when we talk of 5G, we should also talk in terms of, we have said that we will expand cooperation 5G through signing of a new MOU on supplier diversification and defining standards for interoperability. And those standards will come in terms of big data, in terms of quantum computing, in terms of AI, in terms of, when we mesh in and merge the contemporary technologies along with the rollout of 5G, I think there we are talking sense that these two nations can do it, because like I said, we combine hardware, firmware, software and brainware. And I think there is a great equal contribution, or maybe, very matching contribution from both sides, and it can actually happen. Yep.
Right. Thank you, sir. A couple of quick questions that have come across. One is from Mr. Baljinder Singh. He's saying that while defense development in U.S. is thrown open to private industry in India, every development is routed through DRDO, which stymies the projects totally. Should India not make it open competition for private sector? 100% subsidy or foreign company willing to manufacture in India is not considered Indian. He's asking why. So there is a need for India to make a level playing field for achieving Atmanirbhar Bharat. Another quick question is on if the panel were to recommend top 3 projects under DTII, DWTI in the near future, what should they be? I'm just putting all the questions. Speakers' comments about furtherance of joint tech research with U.S. universities, if you can talk a bit more. I know we are really running short of time. And how much U.S. companies should perceive the enhancement of FDI to 74%? And another quick question that we've got is on the topic of Russia. The topic of Russia is divergent. Both India and US should look at convergent threats to build up the relationship like China, and hybrid terrorism to build convergent threats to build up the relationship like China, and hybrid terrorism thoughts. So I think the person is actually, Ankit Kumar is asking about how do you see even the hybrid terrorism playing up in this domain? Anyone can respond to any of the questions there. Thank you.
So I think I will start off with what, the question asked by this young lady, Nayan, and say, if there are 3 projects, what should they be? And you see, today we are talking about what is happening in the world. So we are talking about a next generation aero engine. That is, I think, to my mind, one of the top projects that India is looking at. The next thing we are looking at is a HALE, a high altitude long endurance UAS, and a counter UAS system along with that. And then, of course, we are talking about strategic materials and multi-role fighter aircrafts. So, Nayan, I think if these were to be the top ones, I think that is what we should look at, because these are the areas where India is today focusing. And countries like France and UK have already thrown in their hat. So it's a question of whether US is also willing to be a partner in this game. And India is not going to wait forever, and that I can tell you again. So when Baljinder Singh is asking this question on, what is a level playing field for Atmanirbharta? So I think, Baljinder, you make a very pertinent point. So there is a company law which defines as to what is an Indian company. And then there is a defense acquisition procedure which defines as to what is an Indian defense company. So, and therefore, and there is, I believe there is a finance regulation which defines what is an Indian company. And therefore, in great democracies, you got different points of views even within the government. And I think there needs to be a synchronization around that. And I very much appreciate your point to say, it's not a question of 100% subsidiary. It's not a question of 26% FDI. I think it is a question of regulation. So, for example, when I visited Australia, and Australian government invited me over there, and when we visited the company, they said, please go and visit our Lockheed Martin. I said, what do you mean you're Lockheed Martin? So I visited Lockheed Martin Australia, Boeing Australia, Cobham Australia, and all that. And there it's a 100% subsidiary, but it's an independent business unit. They have got the rules and regulations laid down so clearly. The regulatory is around that has been covered so very well that even a 100% subsidiary behaves, functions, and has an attitude as good as any other Australian company. And that is the attitude that we need to bring in India. And I think since we lack those regulations around that, those tight regulations, and that's why I think we are wary of, and that's why we started from 26%. If you remember in 2006-7, when I was still the director inside, and we went on to 50, 49, 51, and today we are talking about 74, 26. We have expanded the FDI. But the question is, do we still have that trust that somebody tomorrow will close the door and walk away? Again, the threat of sanctions looming. And today, like Rick was mentioning some time back, CAATSA waiver has to be, closed. That I don't know whether I want to call it hegemonistic or whatever it is. But I think what I want to say is, your enemy, you deal with it. Let's cooperate. Let's deal it together. But, we don't, when that threat goes away, then we talk about an equal relationship. And I think that's where we want to talk. And I think the rest of the questions, I'll leave it to Rick and Subimal to take on.
Rick, yeah, you can maybe respond on how US companies perceive the enhancement of FDI to 74% and the other one on DRDO, if you would like to. And Subimal.
I would say, and Subimal, of course, he actually, was in U.S. industry recently, but I think it's a feather in the cap. It's helpful to see the FDI caps increase, but the things I mentioned before, the deal pipeline is still so slow that you wouldn't put those facilities in, as aggressively as otherwise. And again, India's electric power grids, everybody on this call knows, they're up and down. Companies face issues, high cost of electricity, influx. So a lot of those other issues are still there. So it's helpful. There are other headwinds, but you do see, at least at the national level, trying to break those down. And something that I think Colonel Kuber brought up before about the small business ecosystem is really, really important. I love, the other element that was brought up by Agahotri on college cooperation, university research cooperation, because frankly, again, U.S. companies are not going to want to give up that tech. They invested in it, and unless India is going to pay for that, they're not going to want to just give it up at some, but building the route together, in this Quad Fellows program, where we're actually bringing researchers together to look at the next big wave. That to me is pretty exciting. It is putting seeds that may not gestate for quite some time, but I think at the end of the day, there's a lot more chance of real joint cooperation of tech if we start where the core research begins, rather than trying to fast forward it and expecting a company that spent all that money and decades to build something just to kind of hand the keys over. So the college thing I like quite a bit. DTTI, I'll mention briefly. There's one that I've been banging on for quite some time, and this kind of gets to the aspirational work streams we've set up, like the Aircraft Carrier Working Group. I would love to see a working group created looking at port security and surveillance. Similar to the Aircraft Carrier Working Group, where the United States agrees to kind of offer up the entire kitty of technologies that we've got. India is looking to expand places like Andaman and Nicobar Islands, the ability to secure ports, but also use them as surveillance points. We all agree that's something critical. And as we have shared ability to watch, sub movements and above ocean movements. So I think, copying something they did with aircraft carriers on port security and surveillance, to me, is one of the next things I'd like to work on, because that's an area that I think we all have a high degree of comfort and a real interest in sharing intelligence, and it kind of becomes a precursor to all kinds of other areas of cooperation. So I'll throw that one on the table. It's big, it's aspirational, but could be a lot of fun. Subimal?
Well, Rick, you and Colonel Kuber, I personally think that in DTTI, since we have already gone with the big ones in the last 3 rounds that we saw, but we could go nowhere. So possibly we should start with something very, very small and possibly a subcomponent of, something, say, for example, HAIL, Colonel Kuber mentioned, maybe something just within there, or something within the aircraft engine part. Somewhere we have to make it successful. Somewhere we have to see that it happens. So maybe something around cyber, I would say, a joint cybersecurity related engine, that's able to sort of, protect network, something like that. One of them remains. And of course, within the larger platform-based system, some aspect of it, make it successful, and then build more on top of it. That's how I would see. So to answer Nayan Nag's question, if there are 3 things, I would think we should go for 3 small things. Number 2, should India make it open competition for private sector when it comes to DRDO and the research part? I think the government has made an effort to, give its R&D money also to the private guys. I think somewhere DRDO has to be competitive to the private guys also. Many of the private companies today have come up to certain scale in this country, are bidding for big programs and having back-end work already happening. So our preference for DRDO has to go away, and DRDO shouldn't be stigming a lot of the projects that can actually come out of the private sector. So that's what the government should proactively look at. So these are the 2 questions I would answer. I don't know if anything more. Maybe the 74% part, which Rick also tried to answer. Are the American companies happy? You see, notionally from a 51% to a 74% really doesn't make much of a difference. Possibly you have independence more about how you control the particular program. But by and large, with a large negative list coming now, a lot of the scope for utilizing that 74% bounty by the American companies have reduced. So there have to be specific programs which are identified where the US companies can actually be participating and then taking advantage of the 74% lead that they have. Otherwise, with the number of programs shrinking in those negativity lists that have been announced, I think there are the scope is far much less, to be making an optimal performance even with that increase in FDI investment. Thank you, Sandhya.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Chatterjee, on that. A quick question that has come on is it's talking about how former U.S. ambassador Kenneth Juster himself called for including CAATSA on Indo-U.S. relations last year. What is going to be Biden administration's possible response in future? Anyone would like to take that?
Yeah, you see, I think one good thing that has happened in the Biden administration is that the sanctions have not been imposed, and that's a good thing. But now the question is that a good thing, or is it a good thing that we want that that sword to be removed? We don't even want to think that it could ever be there. So that's the question. So now today when we start, I liked a very good comment made by Blinken some time back, and he said, we will increase the India-U.S. cooperation to a level where people will stop talking about CAATSA and other things, and that is what I think we are actually looking at. And we are looking at, I think we should make CAATSA irrelevant by increasing the type of technology and industry cooperation to a level that both countries become sort of helpless in ensuring that the relationship just continues. And that was a very good comment from Blinken some time back. So I thought that should probably help in improving this type of relationship.
Any thoughts, Richard, on that? What Colonel Kuber just said.
I mean, I kind of laid out my thinking on where we're at right now a little bit earlier. I think that the fact that you've got these ministerials and leader summits happening as India takes possession of the S-400, there's pretty clear indication that neither side plans to use this as a moment to sever. So I don't think at this point that we're likely to apply CAATSA sanctions. So I think we're in a pretty good spot, but nothing's done till it's done. And so if Russia expands its invasion, goes after other countries, something else, it gets more complex. But right now, I think you see an intent.
Right. We have a question from Mr. Bhattacharjee on research and defense. He's looking for some figures on. He's saying that technology, especially defense technology, research is intensive. Does any of the panelists have any R&D expenditure of Indian private industry, and in which sectors?
So I can give it a try, Mr. Balachander. So you see, as far as some of our defense public sector units are concerned, I can give you some figures of Bharat Electronics and Hindustan Aeronautics. So they are spending something like 2.5 to 3% of their the revenues on research. Today, if you talk of a company like, let us say, Tata and L&T, their investment on and Bharat Forge, which I know, their investment which is on research is close to about 6 to 7%. If you consider companies like the Adani Defense Group, they have fundamentally started investing in research. Even when they began, they started with investment in research. If you think of companies like the New Space Research Laboratories and all that, it started as a research laboratory itself. So there is 100% research. Today they have about something like 100 odd engineers who are doing only research. If you think of companies like Numerics Systems, they only do research, design, development. If you think of companies like Mahindra Systems, and so what I'm trying to tell you is, I have companies from the extremes. I mean, what I know of some companies which are the top leading companies, the defense public sector units, the top private companies, to the smallest guy on the ground. So if you ask that fellow, he's only doing research. There have been, I know there is a company called, what was that? I mean, recently I came across this. So they are doing, they said, it is time for us only to put our money in research right now. We are only pumping money. We are only trying to understand the technologies and homegrown. And the importance is they also realize that technology is not easy to come. And therefore, they're trying to put in as much effort as they can in getting the best engineers, getting the best candidates over there. And they're producing UAVs, they're producing tethered UAV platforms. I mean, I've seen them in the geospatial very recently. So I've seen. So, Mr. Balchandran, I should say that the culture is great. Today, we are talking about a 25% of the Indian research budget, a DRDO budget, being allocated for research with the private industry. The companies like Rotor and all that who are doing these rotary wings and the UAVs on tethered platforms are only investing in research. So Idea Forge, Adani Defense System, I mean, it's names are irrelevant to my mind, but I think a number of companies have come with this culture and have come with the culture of gaining knowledge on the system because they know that it's not coming easy. And I think today, from the government side, we are seeing the number of patents that have been filed are increasing multifold. So, for example, if there were only about 60 patents in 2010, we are already talking in terms of 400, 500 patents that are getting filed. So there is a culture of filing patents. There's a culture of getting into research development, the culture of generating IP. There's a culture of sustaining IP. There's a culture of managing IP. I think we are doing an excellent job.
Great.
And to add, Sandhya, just, one more point. We are today one of the largest startup ecosystems in the world. One of our companies right now in Paris, in one of these, I'm just forgetting the name again, Bonvi Technologies, was identified as the startup of the year. Bonvi Technologies, electrically powered UAV. Things are happening, and all this is happening because of the investments that people are doing in research and development. Sorry, Sandhya, all yours.
Sure. Richard, do we have some numbers of US as well? How the research numbers are panning out?
I don't have that on hand, sorry.
Sure. We have another question from a panelist talking about, it's a detailed question though. I'm just struggling to be on the chat back. It's from Sukumar Menon. He says India's armed forces and its ordnance establishments would need a heavy dose of support in terms of research and development. It's quite apparent that the current level of investments may not be adequate to meet the future needs, especially given China's superiority and pace of development in this area. The technology gap is something that erodes India's strength in defense preparedness. Atmanirbhar has its own role in building up and strengthening the defense industry, but should in no way prevent acquisitions and imports that are strategic in nature. It's a brilliant question. The two should go hand in hand and to the extent practical. My question to the panel is, how do you think this can be achieved?
So, Srikumar, I think you're bringing out a very great point. And this is a perennial debate. So the question I always have been asking is, Atmanirbhar is fine, but what about the Indian Armed Forces? Are we giving them the best state-of-art technology to hold us secure while we are enjoying ourselves in the hinterland? And that's the question I always keep asking. So are we prepared to take the second best or the third best just because it is Atmanirbhar? And we don't want our forces to have the best, and we expect them to do the best. So if you give, you can't expect ordinary people to do extraordinary things. You've got to equip the soldiers also with the extraordinary stuff. So I think that debate is on. But let me tell you, along with this debate, what has happened. So something, I think I'm not looking at incremental technologies when we talk of technology transfer. I'm looking at transformation technologies. I'm not looking at incremental Atmanirbhar when I talk of Atmanirbhar. I'm talking of transformational Atmanirbhar when we talk of this thing. So China's superiority, yes, it's a given. But do you know how we are dominating the South China Sea today? Do you know the number of port calls that our warships are doing around the Indian Ocean region? Do you know that today we have, I mean, I don't know, yes, since it's come out of my mouth, let me tell you this. We are mapping the South China Sea, the Indian Ocean region to the extent that we would be able to pick up, what we want to pick up and be prepared for an eventuality. So today we are talking about, multinational intercommunication agreements on this. But yes, the technology gap exists. And the technology gap exists, let me assure you, Sri Kumar, only in conventional technologies, not in contemporary technologies. And therefore, where conventional technologies are concerned, yes, we are a little behind. But I think when you see the number of missile tests that DRDO has done in the last about 2 years during the COVID, when the whole world was sitting at home, DRDO was busy firing missiles left, right, and center in the air. And any number of NOTAMs have been issued, any number of strategic missiles have been fired, it is amazing to know that today, slowly, we have started production of strategic missiles. Today, we are talking in terms of equipping a foreign country with our LCA, with our own missile onto it. We are today. So I think Atmanirbhar Bharat to that extent is working very well. But yes, the strategic nature of gaps that you're talking about, I think there a little bit of balance is required. And I think the MOD is sort of engaged its attention to that. And therefore, they've identified systems and platforms that actually can be put into this. And they've identified some of these platforms. There were about 57. I mean, I'm just giving you some vague numbers. They have we brought it down to about 12 to 15. And I think these are the 15 programs that we'll buy outside. If you see, recently, let me give you a figure. 90% of the procurement in the last financial year has been from domestic sources. It speaks well for the domestic industry. Does it speak well for the Indian Armed Forces? I don't know. I'm not a judge to that. I think the Indian Armed Forces are a judge to that. And I want to leave it there because we are looking at some capabilities that we need to build it. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I know we are still getting some of the questions, but I think you have to take them offline with the panelists later. But thank you so much. But I would like to have some of the final comments from all our panelists. I'll start with Subimal Bhattacharjee. Any final comments on how do you see this going forward?
I remain very optimistic about the Indo-U.S. Defense Cooperation. I think a good beginning has been made. A steady approach has already set in. And we have to just tick the right boxes to be able to fill in the gaps that still deter the most optimal form of this relationship. So there are opportunities. I think emerging technologies is one area that I've highlighted, which takes it forward. The platforms, everyone is being recalibrated. Everything is getting recalibrated as far as the equipments are concerned to fight in the new battlefield. And so that's where a joint collaboration is always possible, whichever way, whether it's they getting into our Atmanirbhar ecosystem or we jointly building something using the DTTI and taking it forward. So the future is very, very optimistic, I would say.
Thank you so much. Richard, final last comments from you.
Well, the two things I think that underpin everything, and we'll get it right if we have trust, and if I think we do a better job about digging in more deeply on the shared threats. Once we talk about in the 20-year horizon, what are the threats India is going to face in its neighborhood? What are the gaps? Can India combat them themselves? Where do they need help at? I still think we're not quite there on having that complete perspective on shared. There still is not enough attention, I think, by U.S. policymakers on the threats India faces in the Indian Ocean region. And I think for Indian policymakers, There's a little bit gap in terms of the 20-year horizon on the specific threats that the country may face and where the technology gaps kind of exist. I think if we get shared threat perception and we build trust, I think the rest of these items we talked about today are going to fall into place relatively easily.
Great, thank you. Final word, I'm giving it to Kuber.
Okay, thank you, Sandhya, thank you. So since you told that I should give the final word, then I think I want to quote from the Bhagavad Gita, what Lord Krishna said. So Lord Krishna tells Arjuna, Traigunya Vishya Veda Nitraigunya Bhavarjuna. These three gunas, the Sattva guna, the Tama guna, and the Raja guna, he says, rise above these three gunas and make them irrelevant. So I think what Blinken says makes a lot of sense to me. Let us bring this defense cooperation between the two countries to a level where these senators who come out with such funny ideas like CATSA and all that, they become irrelevant by themselves. I think a very wonderful question was raised in the chat box by Ramatavle, and I know Colonel Ramatavle because he is one of the experts in CBR and technologies world over, and he's a doctorate in CBR. And when he raises the question of should we also cover research, defense, security studies, university, he's talking like a scholar. And here is where, when great minds meet, when great democracies meet, when education becomes the foundation, when knowledge becomes the repository, and when the sharing of thoughts become our common goal, and the welfare of humanity becomes the make the world a better place to live in becomes our common goal. I think Ram, I think you're talking something like that, and I think we should encourage a lot of interaction between universities, between students, between think tanks, and that puts in a foundation for the industry to interact in a more interactive manner. And all these senators who come out with Katsa, Putsa and all that will become absolutely relevant. And Sandhya, thank you very much with that comment. Thank you.
Thank you. I think brilliant thoughts and quoting from Bhagavad Gita eventually. But I definitely want to thank all the brilliant panelists today, three gentlemen who were actually brilliant on the conversation and domain experts. I thank Cuts for hosting this, and I hope you all really enjoyed it and will take back something from there. There'll be more conferences and webinars to follow. Thank you. Really appreciate everyone joining in.